What do you get when you cross a fisherman and a jazz enthusiast? An Anglo-Saxon. Why did the feudal lord hate the Beach Boys? Because they make surf music. Speaking of surfing, what does a serf never want to hear his feudal lord say? Hang 10. So dumb. So dumb. 7th grade, we're only a couple weeks away, and then you don't have to hear any more jokes. But until then, jokes every day. All right. The last video, we left off in the middle of the Norman conquest. So remember, the Norman conquest is going to refer to the Norman invasion of Anglo-Saxon England. And it occurs because the leader of the Normans, William of Normandy, believes he has a legitimate claim to the throne of England, whose current occupant, Harold Godwin, he believes stole the throne away, right? So remember, Edward the Confessor failed to clearly appoint William of Normandy as his successor. Most historians think that Edward the Confessor wanted William of Normandy to be the King of England, but he failed to clearly establish this, and Harold Godwin claimed that William of Normandy actually told him that he was going to be the King of England. So Harold Godwin is in England when Edward the Confessor dies. Harold Godwin takes the throne for himself. William of Normandy is like, no, that throne is mine. So he's going to invade England from the south in something called the Norman invasion. Meanwhile, the King of Norway in the north is invading England because the King of Norway is also claiming that the throne of England belongs to him. Right? So remember, 7th grade, if you ever conquer the world, you need to clearly appoint a successor. Otherwise, there's going to be a bunch of war and chaos after you die, and nobody wants that. So be very clear about who you want your successor to be. All right. So the year 1066, the Norman invasion in the south begins, and Harold Godwin has a choice to make. He can send some of his army to the south to fight William of Normandy. He can send some of it to the north to fight the King of Norway. But splitting your army like that, probably not a good idea. You're going to be outnumbered on both sides, and you have a good chance of losing one or both of those battles. So instead of splitting his army up, Harold Godwin has to choose between fighting William of Normandy and the King of Norway, and he chooses to fight the King of Norway first. So he takes his army up north. Again, this is what we covered in the last video. And he fights off the King of Norway's invasion in a very bloody battle called the Battle of York. Right? He's victorious, but it's extremely costly. Right? He loses a lot of men in that battle. And meanwhile, in the south, William of Normandy is just hanging out in the south of England, waiting for Harold Godwin to come and get him. So William of Normandy could have moved his army into central England while Harold Godwin was up north. But William of Normandy is smarter than that. He doesn't want to do that. He knows that if Harold Godwin defeats the King of Norway, his men are going to be depleted, they're going to be tired, and then they're going to have to march all the way back down across England to go fight William of Normandy. So William of Normandy wants Harold Godwin's army to have to travel as far as possible. William of Normandy also has another advantage. In addition to being well rested and just kind of hanging out in the south of England, getting ready to fight, he makes sure that his soldiers are better equipped than what Harold Godwin has. So William of Normandy had done a good job of funding this war. He got a lot of the Dukes of Normandy to support him in his claim for the throne. And so he had a large army, he had horses, he had archers, he had a lot of things that Harold Godwin's army didn't have much of. So most of Harold Godwin's army was on foot, and they didn't have archers, and there really weren't a lot of horses. It was just guys, soldiers with swords and spears. That was basically it. So Harold Godwin marches his army back down all the way across England, and they're really tired by the time they get to William of Normandy. And William of Normandy fights a big battle against King Harold Godwin in a place in southern England called Hastings, and this is the famous Battle of Hastings. And in this battle, William of Normandy kills Harold Godwin, and he kills Harold Godwin's brothers. Harold Godwin did not have a son at this time, so he kills Harold Godwin, and he kills the brothers. This means that the Godwins now have no claims to the throne at all. Because normally if you kill a king, if the king doesn't have a son, there's a good chance that the throne would pass to the king's brother, right? But William of Normandy is sure to have both Godwin killed and Godwin's brothers killed in this Battle of Hastings. This ends Godwin rule, and William takes on a new title. He starts to be known as William the Conqueror. So William the Conqueror is the guy who ends Anglo-Saxon rule in England, and he becomes the first king of England. All right, so after the battle, William marches across England, and he basically destroys all the property by burning and looting that belonged to Godwin and Godwin's nobles. Right? So in the year 1066, William is crowned King of England. So all in 1 year. He invades England and he's crowned King of England all in 1 year. All right, so this Norman conquest permanently changes England in a variety of ways. One way the Norman conquest changes things is William the Conqueror is a big advocate of feudalism in a way that Edward the Confessor and Harold Godwin were not. Right? So King William introduces a strong feudal system. The way he's able to do this is because at the Battle of Hastings, he killed a lot of Anglo-Saxon nobles. And when you kill the nobles, the land, the property doesn't pass to their families, right? It belongs to the conquerors. Right? So if you kill a noble, you get his land. The land doesn't just automatically go to his wife and kids. That's not how this works, right? So William has a lot of land to give out belonging to all these Anglo-Saxon nobles that he'd killed. And there are only about 180 nobles that William brought into England with him. Most of the Norman nobles remain in Normandy. So he only brings 180 Norman nobles into England. And this meant that all of this land in England was going to be divided among 180 men. That means each of the 180 men are going to become very, very wealthy and very, very powerful soon, right? It concentrates power in a very strong group, or in a very small group. And this is necessary to achieve feudalism, right? So in order to give this land to these Norman barons, these Norman nobles, these nobles have to become vassals, meaning they have to swear oaths of fealty to William of Normandy, which means they have to supply William with military service, with soldiers, with supplies for future battles, sometimes with taxes, with whatever he wants, right? Because this is what they have to do. This is part of their feudal oath in exchange for the land that they've received, right? And then they also build a lot of castles on this land. So England is full of castles. A lot of these castles were built shortly after the Norman invasion. All right, so that's one way Norman conquest changes England, by introducing a feudal system. A second way is because instead of England's new rulers being Anglo-Saxons, they're now noble. They're now Normans, right? So they have a different culture. They have a different background. They're not native to England. Oh, by the way, this is an image from a really famous tapestry called the Bayou Tapestry. This is the earliest image we have of the Battle of Hastings. Is created shortly after that battle. And it shows that the Normans, the Norman invaders, are on horseback, whereas the Anglo-Saxons, Godwin's men, are on foot, right? So the guys on foot don't really stand a chance against the guys on horseback, right? That was a big part of why William was successful in the Battle of Hastings. All right, third way the Norman conquest changes England is it introduces Latin and French into the land, right? Prior to the Norman invasion, Anglo-Saxons spoke the Anglo-Saxon language, which was kind of like a mix of like the Viking language and uh, a Germanic language. It's not English. A lot of people think that people in England spoke English before the Norman invasion. That's not true, right? So this Anglo-Saxon language slowly mixes with Latin and French over time. So over a couple hundred years, Latin, French, and the Anglo-Saxon native language all blend together. And this forms the English language. Now, the English language that they spoke 1,000 years ago, or, not quite 1,000 years ago, but the English language that was spoken in the beginning would be unrecognizable to our ears. It's called Old English, and it has a lot of words that we just don't use anymore. But the English language did develop very quickly, and pretty soon they started speaking something called Middle English. Now, Middle English was a lot different than Old English, and Middle English, if you heard it, you'd be able to partly understand what they're saying. Right? There's still a lot of strange words and strange pronunciations that we're not used to, but Middle English is much more understandable than Old English. And then by the time Shakespeare comes around in England a few hundred years later, we really have something that's a lot more like our modern day English. Okay. So, William the Conqueror is crowned in 1066. 20 years later, 1086, he creates a plan of taxation by creating something called the Domesday Book. So the Domesday Book is a very important book in medieval England, in feudal England. It's a book that has a very detailed account of all the property and all the goods owned by every single taxpayer in England. Right? So the Domesday Book was a tool that William used to be able to know how much to expect in tax revenue from every single town, village, city, castle, region in all of England. Right? So he knew how much he should be receiving in taxes from all over England. And this gives William and his successors tremendous power over England because they knew exactly how much money they were going to get from each household. Right? Information is power, and the Domesday Book is a good example of this. Right? So even though, England is under the control of William and his successors, over the centuries, there are different powerful feudal lords that kind of pop up here and there, and they start to rival the power of the throne. And the reason for this is because kings in feudal systems are still dependent on their nobles to provide soldiers and horses and money to make weapons for battle and things like that, right? So kings became very dependent on the barons and the nobles. Baron is just a fancy word for like any noble. And so in exchange, a lot of them are going to demand things from the king. All right, that's it. Next video will be on Magna Carta.